It's my pleasure to be here with Dr. Jane McGonigal. Jane, you are really someone who's considered one of the top thinkers and experts in gamification in games and the use of games in education. And you wrote a fantastic best-selling book called Reality is Broken. And I've had the chance to watch you speak at TED and have enjoyed the way you think about this whole area. Do you mind, just as a beginning, tell me a little bit more about you growing up and how did you first become interested in this area?
Well, I actually got interested in gamers solving real world problems a little more than a decade ago. It was 2001, and there were a few communities online of gamers starting to form around wanting to use their game skills to accomplish something in the real world. And they were arguing with each other about whether this was kind of ludicrous, because games are games and reality is reality, but some were really passionate about it, and they broke off into splinter groups, and there was one called Collective Detective, and then they were going to do investigations and crowdsourcing. This was before crowdsourcing was a term. They had this idea that all the gamers in the world could band together and collaborate and cooperate and use their collective skills for good. The problem was there were no games being made yet for that kind of work. So I was doing my PhD at UC Berkeley, and I thought maybe that was something I could do my research on, first to figure out what is it in a good game that helps gamers develop skills and abilities that would apply to real life, and then could we make some games that would actually bridge that desire to save the real world with the reality of tough problems that don't have easy solutions programmed into them by a designer.
And so what did you find out?
Well, a lot of the things that games seem to do really well have to do with building resilience. So being able to maintain a sense of optimism and drive, even in the face of a tough obstacle, of being able to fail and learn from your mistakes more easily and more confidently, of being able to draw on social resources so that you can build up allies and sort of momentum for whatever you're trying to solve. So all these areas of resilience that are basically sort of mental, emotional, and social skill sets that, if applied to a problem that might otherwise seem daunting or seem impossible or seem outside your skill set, can actually help you connect your talents to a real problem, whether it's trying to predict the future. We've done a lot of future forecasting games where non-experts outperform experts in predicting what will happen. Games where you might be asked to work with scientists to help cure a disease, even though you have no training in medicine. And having that optimism, that self-efficacy, the drive, and the ability to collaborate seem to get you over that gap of seeming absence of expertise, and you can still find a way to contribute.
So, what is it about making something into a game that actually changes the way people perceive that thing? Because it's different, right? When you turn something into a game, it changes how people participate, what they're willing to do. Sure. Could you speak about that a little bit?
Yeah, the number one thing that I've found through my research that makes people able to engage better with tough problems in a game setting has to do with the way that stress is perceived. So in everyday life, when we have a problem or an obstacle, it's usually perceived as negative stress. And negative stress creates all these sort of biochemical reactions. Your heart rate goes up, adrenaline. Your pupils might dilate. The blood flow in the brain patterns changed so that you're really threat center focused. And we don't like how that feels because we experience that as anxiety or anger, and it's just something we try to avoid. So people will avoid obstacles and problems that provoke those feelings. But if we feel in control of our engagement, if we feel like we're volunteering for the obstacle, we feel like there's safety, we can participate creatively, and if we make a mistake or don't succeed, that there's not necessarily going to be real world consequences. We have all the same physiological reactions, but we experience it as excitement, as ambition and passion and motivation and desire. And it's literally all of the same changes. We have more attention, more motivation, more energy, but it's positive stress, or what psychologists call eustress. And all you have to do is change someone's perception of whether they have volunteered for this and whether it is safe to participate without fear of failure. And games provide that psychological space for us.
So have you seen it where a CEO or an entrepreneur can actually create that flip in a circumstance and change the way their employees or people are participating? Have you seen something that simple, just the way it's phrased or presented?
I think one of the best implementations I've seen of this was by Tony Hsieh at Zappos. He had decided that it was very important for there to be interdepartmental collaboration. They were looking for innovation and creativity, and they'd identified one of their weak spots was actually having members of Zappos across teams speak to each other, know what everyone else was up to, so they could come up with these creative ideas. So they created a really simple game called the Face Game, and it became part of the login system to your computers every day at work. The first thing that would happen when you logged in, instead of going to your desktop, you were just shown a picture of somebody else in the company, and you could choose to skip it. So voluntary, it's always important. You have to be volunteering for the challenge. You could skip it if you wanted to get to work, but if you wanted to play, you would try and guess the name of this employee and what department they were in. And it would be multiple choice, and if you get it right, you earn points, you go on streaks. If you get it wrong, it tells you a little bio and profile, what their sort of mandate is in the company, what they care about. And not only was it considered beneficial in the company to be really good at spotting other people, but also you wanted to be always recognized when your picture came up in the system. So it started to change behavior within the company. You'd walk into the lunchroom, somebody would stand up and say, "Hey, I'm Jane. I work in, X department. Remember my face. Here's, I want you to be, because you want to be seen as somebody who's socially, really strong within the company." And this was great because it was a game that you could choose to play for literally 60 seconds every day. It was really well integrated into the workflow of the company, but also really well tied to their goals as an organization. And it created a sense of, competition. But even the competition was based around people getting to know each other better so that they could collaborate. So it was a very well-balanced intervention.
And so the attributes, again, of making it, of what you need to do to make it fun, is it still needs to be challenging. It still needs to be something that engages people. But you said it needs to be voluntary. It needs to be something that they feel they have a sense of control over. Anything else?
Yeah, well, when I design games like this, I've actually been quite inspired by the X Prize Foundation. So if you'd be interested in this, I saw you speak at the Long Now, it's a number of years, maybe 5 years ago, and you talked about inspiring people to make dramatic breakthroughs for humanity. And I actually adopted that as sort of the bar for games that I made. Awesome. I was going to tell players that is what we are collectively doing. We are going to try to, have some radical breakthrough for humanity by playing this game. And I started to talk about these as kind of the epic win of a game. Not all gamification is concerned with epic wins. Sometimes it's small wins like the Zappos game where you just want people to change a little bit of their behavior every day. But when I make games, I try to think of something that would feel to the player like an extraordinary breakthrough, doing something that's never been done before, doing something they didn't think was possible. So one example, I did a game with the New York Public Library this past year. They wanted to get young people, say 16 to 35, to show up to the physical space of the library and see it as a resource and a center, and everything's done online, obviously. But if you are actually near one of these spaces, the architecture can be inspiring, and you have this serendipity of running into people. Anyway, they wanted people to come, so they asked if we could make a game to encourage young people to come. And some of the early ideas kicked around before I came on board were very classic gamification ideas. You get points for checking out books, and you could get achievement badges for visiting different collections. And to me, all you're doing there is you're trying to convince the player to do something you want them to do. When I make games that are trying to intervene in the real world, my first concern is, what would a player intrinsically be motivated to do? What would inspire them and help them feel like they were living a dream? And so the game that I created for the New York Public Library, the promise was, if you play this game and you win, and for me, everybody can win. If you finish the game, you win. I don't do a lot of competition.
Right.
I promise if you put in the time and energy, you can reach your epic win condition. And in this case, the epic win condition was, you've written a book, and the book will go in the stacks of the library. You'll be a published author in the New York Public Library catalog, and you can come and show your friends and family. The library will pledge to keep your book in its collection for as long as New York City is standing.
So that's fantastic. How did this work?
We created a mobile app that would lead you around the library hunting these treasures that the library had, physical artifacts that would be special, one of a kind, and you might be able to sort of get the aura of it, have this like special face-to-face encounter with it. For example, the Declaration of Independence, they have a copy that Thomas Jefferson was editing, and you can see him changing words and changing thoughts, and you can see that he scribbled out a section critiquing the institution of slavery. I mean, you could see the process of this world-changing document that we just think of as being, you know, kind of set in stone.
Yeah.
See the humanity behind it, and the indecision and the uncertainty and the courage and all of that. So we picked all of these objects to try to really humanize the process of changing the world, so that the players could look at the process of saying something for the first time or making something for the first time and say, okay, I could do that. And then they would unlock on their phone a writing quest inspired by that encounter. So for their encounter with the Declaration of Independence, the writing quest was to make their own declaration. So that was declared hundreds of years ago. What needs to be declared today? And they would write that. They would have to get 56 people to co-sign it, because that's how many people signed the original. And then add it to our global collection. So we have everybody sort of adding these things, so you could see everybody's solutions to the quest. And then you could print on demand just all of your 100 quests to make a volume of a book called 100 Ways to Make History. Or you could pick, you know, from other quests too. Let's say you didn't have time to do, you know, all 100 quests. But the first night we locked 500 players in the library overnight from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. And they wrote the first volume together, overnight. And that was amazing, because the library was like, we put this trailer online. We're like, be the first to play the game, 500 overnight. And they said, you have declared publicly that we're going to convince 500 people to spend a Friday night in the library. Like, you're going to make us look terrible if we can't do it. But we had 10,000 people apply for those 500 slots.
10,000
10,000 people. People who did not, you know, people who've never been to the New York Public Library were so motivated by this epic win.
And they weren't all homeless New Yorkers.
They weren't. No, they were amazing. And they were just extraordinarily, I would say, the game brought this extraordinary optimism out of them. And they were collaborating, and they were thinking about their future and the world that they wanted to invent. And it was beautiful.
That is beautiful. That's fantastic. So the attributes of what made that, just want to pull out of you the attributes of what made that really successful. Again, it was epic in that regard. It was something that was really unique and different and exciting. Yes?
Yeah.
What were the other attributes?
Well, the hardest part of working in the space is figuring out how to create micro contributions that will add up to something bigger. I think a lot of people are excited about using games to engage lots of people in tackling a problem, but they haven't cracked that nut yet. You know, I'm in politics and I want people to engage with government more. Well, what is one unit of contribution that somebody who's not skilled or trained or educated in that area could make? You know, in the case of the library game, we thought about, you know, breaking a book down into 100 quests, and we wanted to empower each quest. You know, we wanted the player to have had this moment of connection, so they would feel like they had something to say. We didn't want them to be sitting there with writer's block. We gave them something that would inspire them. We talked to them about, just even the design of the language of every quest, to make it sound concrete, small enough that they could tackle it in one go, but, kind of creative enough that there were lots of ways to go at it. Figuring out how to make it possible for people to be better,
right,
or be smarter,
right.
That's the really, really hard part. And the field that's done the best so far in solving that problem is the crowdsourced science space, where they're figuring out how to teach gamers how to virtually fold proteins, or how to read malaria slides. I don't know if you've seen.
Yes, I've seen Malaria Spotter.
Yeah.
And Galaxy Zoo, how to detect galaxies. Amazing stuff.
And I don't know if you saw the study that just came out this week, that they were able to, by combining 22 gamers, get 99% accuracy on detecting malaria.
I saw the paper. Yeah, it came out of an SU graduate.
Oh, hey.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, really.
Oh, well, great.
Yeah, I'm very excited about that.
So that's, the science space is doing a really good job of figuring that out. I think, within the enterprise, being able to think creatively about what could your entire organization do in these sort of little microbursts of participation that would add up to something bigger, or any, all the foundations and nonprofits. If you could get 1 million people to spend 60 seconds doing one thing, first of all, are you sure 1 million people have the skills to do it? And then what would it add up to?
In your book, Reality is Broken, you talk about intrinsic and extrinsic motivators. Could you talk a little about what those are and give some examples?
Yeah. So intrinsic motivation just means you are passionate about doing something for its own sake. And if you look at all the research, it tends to fall into certain buckets. Different researchers call them by different names, but something that feels like it's using your strengths or skills or abilities. So you're challenged, and you're having the opportunity to show what you're good at, or master new skills, or sort of mastery. Anything that creates social connection or social bonding, we respond really positively to that. Being a part of something bigger than ourselves, sort of the search for meaning or purpose. And when you start to add extrinsic rewards on top of that, it can sometimes actually diminish our motivation. So if you pay people to do something that they used to find meaningful, they find it less meaningful. If you gamify something and give people points or achievement badges for an activity that they used to find satisfying for its own sake because it was challenging, they're less likely to do it in the future than if you had never given them points at all. On the other hand, these sort of external feedback systems can be really useful if they're in service of intrinsic motivation. And this is very tricky that I don't think there's been a lot of good writing about this yet. But one of my favorite examples are all of the technologies that Nike has. I'm wearing one now. Do you know the Fuel Band?
I don't. Please tell me.
So this is my Fuel Band, right? It's keeping track of my physical activity. So when I get to the green light, it'll say goal and sparkle and animate. And I'm not quite there yet. I'm a little more than halfway there, so I have to run laps after this interview. It's helping remind me of the goals I set for myself. So I set for myself how much physical activity I want to have. They measure it in this currency called fuel. And every day I can set a new goal for myself. And depending on, for me, maybe I'm injured, so I'm doing rehab, so it's a small goal. Maybe I'm training for a marathon, it's a huge goal. But I set it for myself, and then I get this feedback, and it helps me focus. It reminds me, I haven't done enough today. Or it gives me data. Oh, you seem to have spikes in activity every day at 2 p.m. What are you doing at 2 p.m. right that you could be doing at 8 p.m. differently? And you start to get data that can help you with your intrinsic motivation. If I didn't care about my health, this might not work for me. But because I already care, adding that kind of extrinsic system of points can help me just do more of what I care about, or do better at something that I care about.
So one of the areas that I want to learn a lot about, because I would like to begin utilizing them at the X Prize more and in my companies is leaderboards. So I'm a novice at this. Tell me, how do they work? How do they work? How should people set them up? Where could they be used? Let's dive into this a little bit.
So there's one piece of sort of collective wisdom about leaderboards. That
If you would start first by describing what a leaderboard is
Sure.
and typically
Okay.
what they are.
Okay. Leaderboards are ways that you can track your status within a bigger game community, whether it's tracking high scores or tracking the degree of participation, how often you've logged in. They let you see how you're stacking up against other players. And one thing that we've learned about leaderboards over the past few years that's sort of commonly accepted as true and valid is that leaderboards work better when you're only comparing yourself against your peers. So for example, one of my favorite Xbox Live games, I'm ranked globally like 250,000, and looking at that leaderboard is like really depressing. But when I compare it against just my friends that I've connected to through Xbox Live, I'm like number 3, I'm pretty awesome, and I can try really hard to beat my friend Tom, who's number 2. And so being able to make sort of micro movements within a leaderboard within a social peer group works much better than global leaderboards. This is one thing everybody's learned. So if you're doing a leaderboard, it really helps to make the frame small so somebody has a reasonable chance of success. Otherwise, we found that leaderboards are depressing of engagement rather than motivating of engagement, because after a certain point, it becomes hopeless for 90% or more of the participants. So you have to narrow the frame. Now, the most interesting experience I've had with leaderboards was with a project I did with the World Bank. We created one of the first actually sort of massively online open courses. It was designed for college students to learn social entrepreneurship. And we had players from 130 countries. The first run of this game/course, we had 20,000 students from 130 countries playing together.
Oh.
And we had leaderboards because they were completing missions, and they were writing blog posts and getting points for that. They were uploading videos and photos and getting points for that, and the points were voted on by other players. So you could get points for 10 different things: creativity, resourcefulness, local insight, things like that. So we had these leaderboards: who has the most courage, who has the most local insight, who's completed the most missions, that sort of thing. Well, the players actually kind of revolted against us about a third of the way through this class. It was a 10-week class, because certain people had sort of worked really hard. They were dominating the leaderboards, and they were dominating all the leaderboards. So you were just seeing the same, 25 names over and over again. There were 20,000 people in this course. So they demanded more leaderboards that would expose more players so that they could explore more and meet more people and have a better chance themselves. So we actually invented the first leader cloud, which was a series of just massively multiple leaderboards measuring everything you can imagine. Like, here are 50 random players who have completed a quest within the last 24 hours, right? So just randomly, we're going to pull people who have, here are...
And stack those against each other.
Yes,
Right.
and here are 50 players who have most recently received any points for courage. And here are players who have given away the most +1s in the last 24 hours. So we started narrowing the time frame. We started narrowing, instead of just earning points, we'll measure you for the points you're giving, and the random aspect of it too, picking 50 or 20 randomly from within a subset, so that you were constantly, maybe I'm going to be on the leaderboard now. The reason why that worked, and the reason why the players wanted it, is that they wanted to strengthen the social fabric of the game. And when you have a certain concentration of people dominating success on leaderboards, you don't meet new people, you don't discover new content. It really just sort of creates sort of static. And most leaderboards tend to be, once you're at the top, you're more motivated. So it's a really poorly balanced system. There's almost no way to claw your way in because those people are so motivated now that they're just gonna, they're gonna work harder than everybody else anyway. So that, when I think about leaderboards now, I think about really radically democratizing them and using them not primarily for motivation, but as a way to strengthen the social fabric of the game community.
If you created leaderboards that measured blogging, YouTube videos, and tweets about an ongoing competition, where frankly it's a pretty level setting, everybody can tweet, everybody can blog and create videos. Would you see if you were forcing people to blog, tweet, and versus motivating through competition? I assume you'd get a much more responsive audience through a leaderboard where they're incented to do that. Yes?
Yes, although I think you always want to be kind of holistic in thinking about the impact of what you're incentivizing. So for example, let's say you're using a system, a game-like system, where you're going to try to motivate people to tweet about something, which means their whole social network will be exposed to whatever they're tweeting about. You want to make pretty damn sure that this is not going to have a negative impact on their social capital in the real world, right outside of your system, that they're not going to be seen as spamming or, because if you look within commercial games, the biggest problem that Zynga faced when it was exploding in popularity was they had built in these social viral mechanics that required you to post on your wall and post on friends' walls about what you were doing and asking for help, and people who weren't playing the game hated it so much that Facebook took all game status updates out of people's main feeds, and it shut down the whole channel for all game developers on Facebook, because you were motivating people to do something that in the bigger picture of their lives was actually having a negative impact, right, on their quality of relationships. So, when I create any kind of system where you're going to get points for doing something, you want to make sure that you're at least trying to encourage them to do something with a mind towards quality or relevance. Just for example, the way we were motivating players in the Evoke game for the World Bank, you didn't get points just for posting. You had to earn the points from other players who thought that what you posted showed courage or showed creativity or showed resourcefulness. If it wasn't good, you weren't going to earn any points. So even just requiring players to try to contribute something of value made a big difference. So you would really want to think, if you're trying to use social viral mechanics, requiring participants to contribute something of value to the world as they're doing it, so that they're not, you just don't want the whole thing to collapse on itself and feel like they've, their social networks have been exploited.
So, I imagine that most leaderboards are based on objective activities. Can you create subjective elements as well?
If you can measure it, you can put it on a leaderboard. The question is, can you find a way to measure maybe some more subjective elements of what players are doing? So we have a platform at the Institute for the Future that's a sort of gamified, crowdsourced future forecasting platform where we'll ask a question. Our most popular game was about CubeSats. What if you could launch a personal satellite for less than $1,000? What would you do with it? What do you think other people would do it? What would your company do with CubeSats? What would your city do with CubeSats? And we taught them a little bit about CubeSats, and then have at it. What would you do? And we wanted to have a leaderboard for the most interesting ideas that were contributed. And there's some ways you can very objectively measure that. For example, ideas or cards that were played that had the most replies, so that they generated a lot of conversation. We just assumed they were interesting, and we could create a leaderboard for that. So that's pretty objective. But we also wanted to have experts, who actually knew a lot about CubeSats and what they might be used for, review the stream of ideas and identify ideas that seem to them to be, the opposite of common knowledge or an idea they'd never heard before. That was the holy grail. We wanted experts to hear ideas in the game that they had never heard before, and we called them outliers. And so we would have experts just watching the stream. It's set up very much like Twitter, and they would just star things that haven't heard that one before. That's new to me. And then we could have a leaderboard based on expert sort of subjective opinions that, wow, this is actually a new idea being generated by the players. And that of course is the most popular leaderboard to watch because everybody wants to find the new ideas. But it's not something you can completely automate because it does require some subjective analysis of the content. But at the end, it's easier to measure the success of a game like that. We can go into a game with the idea we want 100 new ideas generated. We did one for the Rockefeller Foundation recently. They were looking for fundamentally new ideas about paths out of poverty. 24 hours, we want 100 new ideas that our experts have never heard before. And so you can, set that as a win condition for the whole community. Everybody plays together. And yes, you'll feel way cooler if you were one of the 100 ideas, but you can also just feel good if the whole game succeeds. Yeah.
So in giving advice to a CEO who wants to create an internal competition or an entrepreneur who wants to create a competition and create a leaderboard and have that leaderboard actually work, the fundamentals, are there a top 5 fundamentals that you would be able to pull out that would give the leaderboard the highest probability of actually being incentivizing people and not decentivizing them?
I think it's interesting because obviously you work in a space where competition is sort of the fundamental, unit in some ways. Yeah. Whereas the first thing I thought of was, no. I would never, ever, ever tell CEOs to launch an internal competition. That's just... But not because I wouldn't ultimately create something that you would consider a competition, but I have found, in 10 years of doing this now, that the most motivating thing is for everybody to band together around an epic win, which is actually what your competitions do.
Yeah.
So if I were a CEO, the first thing I would do is try to identify an epic win for the company and then break that down into things that might help that epic win become a reality. And then people might compete to be the first, group or team to make that aspect of the epic win a reality, so they can focus on things that they're good at and their skills. If I were participating in some kind of a big epic win, it might be something that I don't have a huge skill set to apply to directly, but I'm a good evangelist. I can get people to pay attention to stuff. So maybe within that competition, there's a goal of having 20,000 people external to our company participate, contribute in some way, right? So I could throw my, talent at that to reach that milestone, which we have identified as being part of, So I could be motivated as an individual or as part of a team to succeed and have some competition there, but always within, I think, the idea of a big collective breakthrough goal that that we all win. And the reason why I say that, by the way, is if you look at I'm going to say actual gaming, commercial gaming. Co-op gaming is beating competitive gaming 3 to 4 now. 3 out of every $4 are spent on co-op games.
So what is a co-op game?
Co-op game is just when you are trying to achieve the same goal as everyone else who's playing at the same time. So there are no human opponents in the game. You're all trying to defeat the zombie horde, or you're all trying to build the Minecraft building together, right? People are increasingly drawn to this kind of gaming for a number of reasons. I mean, one, it provokes more positive emotions. You get greater resilience in the goals. If you fail, your co-players are there to pick you up and carry you forward. so you ultimately have more success. But also, as we have more women involved in gaming, just across sort of all psychological research, women are much less motivated by competition, particularly when it's with peers or their sort of ongoing social groups, because there can be real social costs to both winning and to losing. And it is, in my experience of gamification, something identified as a competition will be demotivating to a majority of women in that organization or in that social group. And you can do the same thing, but don't call it a competition, and get that motivation back in. But you have to think really carefully about how somebody's going to think about, if I engage and I try to win, will other people look at me differently? Will they resent me if I win? Will they see me as weak if I lose? It creates a lot of social anxiety in people. Not everybody. Some people are very motivated by competition up until the point that they start to lose, and then they're less motivated. So, my encouragement would be to think about using terminology and game terminology that speaks to what seems to be more universally engaging and that diminishes the social anxiety. Because I hear from people all the time who say, I hate games. I'm never gonna participate in a game. And you ask them why they hate games, they say they don't want to lose and they don't like feeling so competitive, that it's an unpleasant feeling for them. So we have to figure out a way for people not to be scared of losing and to not be worried that it's going to bring out this kind of beast that makes them uncomfortable or unpleasant.
Interesting. So in one part, it's really the competition against the unknown, the competition against the insolvable problem. And you're right, in some cases, the X Prizes, a lot of the teams used to say the next best thing to me winning is someone else wins.
Right.
Because I want this field solved and such. But can you create a scenario where it's a race against an external third party, such that all the, and there are other interesting structures where people try their stuff and then they disclose everything and then they recombine and try again.
Yes. Yeah.
Where there's other interesting prospects or constructs. But in some cases, like I've interviewed, I don't know if do you know Kaggle as a platform, the data mining competition where people are creating algorithms.
Yes.
And there the leaderboards are, Jeremy Howard speaks about, very important because someone says, well, how the heck did they do that? And then the person who's now in second place is racking their brain trying to figure out, how did this person possibly beat me? And I thought I had the most effective solution. So you had said in the beginning, make sure that you have the leaderboard not be a global leaderboard, but to your social peers, so you are being measured in a smaller subset.
Sure, or a smaller time frame. So you can have leaderboards that measure participation across the entire project, but you should also have within the last hour, within the last 24 hours, within the last week, so that...
so you can slice it by geography, by smaller communities, by age, by time. What about, how often should a leaderboard be updated? Can it be something, does it have to be instantaneous? Can it be updated daily, weekly, monthly, over the scope of a competition? Anything about that?
The updating leaderboards in real time has one positive benefit, which is that it keeps people's attention on the game, because there's a sort of addicting quality to sort of refreshing and seeing how things are shaking out, particularly if something's being measured that will change, throughout a day, as opposed to everybody's even, and then after 6 months somebody achieves, that's then doesn't really matter. But that can demotivate participation within a particular time period. So, for example, if I were running a contest or game, say over a 5-week conference or internal meeting, I might only update the leaderboard, once a day, so that teams feel like maybe we're winning. Because as soon as a team knows that they're in the bottom half, you get much worse participation. There is basically no evidence to suggest that being in the bottom half of any leaderboard ever creates this sense of, well, we'll just dig deeper and come back. It's just de-escalating motivation all the way down. So updating it less frequently could have the benefit of keeping people believing they're in the game, which for me it's important that people feel they're still in the game.
What about the number of parameters that goes into a leaderboard? Or, so the leader in an X Prize competition might be calculated by a whole number of parameters until the final event occurs. Mm-hmm. So we have something called the Google Lunar X Prize going on right now. We have 24 teams racing to the moon. Well, a team actually pushes the launch button and goes. There's a lot of, how do you tell who the leader is? So we've thought about, for example, creating a set of different parameters. Like there'd be a set of social media components, Facebook likes, YouTube posts, and so forth and so on, are a set of scores that they can get that has a low multiplier. And then when they're building hardware and they send us, here's our full design, here's a full-scale mock-up, here's a piece of engineering hardware, here's our whatever, then they get medium points in that. And when they sign their launch contract and when they hit their ignition and when they enter lunar orbit, they're getting more and more points until the absolute thing is landing on the moon. Mm-hmm. What do you think of a structure like that?
Well, what I love about that structure is, it less resembles a leaderboard than it does kind of like a quest tree of, you think about more like a game where you have to accomplish this quest and then you have 2 options for the next and it sort of branches off. But there's a sense of progression that ultimately, if you complete 20 quests, you're going to be at some sort of very
You'll be on the moon.
Right, yeah, one way or another. So essentially to do that, you have to really think through the realistic requirements for the epic win. You have to basically believe that it's possible and have a framework for all of those steps that will make it increasingly possible, which is a wonderful thing for increasing participation, right? We talked about how do you break down units of contribution so that anybody can participate. It's kind of a similar way of thinking. People will be more engaged if they see a path, if it doesn't feel so opaque or so but you have to, I think, make the case for why things are important. So the social media aspect is really interesting, right? If you're going to give points to people for building social awareness of this competition or their work or brand within the competition, you should probably make the case for how that helps achieve the larger goal. Whether it's just something like, fomenting public imagination has always been a part of big, breakthroughs in science. And so every time you get a Facebook like or every time somebody retweets your tweet, you're contributing to public engagement with this issue, which will drive investment, which will drive fund. Some way that makes it feel like you're legitimately focused on the goal and not just being
making noise.
Yeah, for me it's always are you asking people to do something that is going to feel good at the end of the day because I made progress towards something that mattered to me, and so that frame, I really think that framing is the difference between gamification that feels like it's exploiting you and gamification that feels like it's empowering you. Oh, I didn't realize that I could do something this simple and be contributing against this benchmark.
So Jane, your current project is called Super Better, which is a super cool name. And so what are you gamifying there?
So Super Better was a game I invented when I had a traumatic brain injury and I had a hard time recovering. Yeah. And at the time I was dealing with depression, anxiety, a lot of pain, feeling basically like there was nothing I could do. With traumatic brain injuries, a lot of times the advice is just wait. Try not to stress yourself out. Try not to stress the brain out. Don't engage in activities that create symptoms. So it's basically the absence of efficacy. There's nothing you can do. And it seemed to me that if I could gamify that experience, find goals, find obstacles, find actions that I could take that would feel like they were making a difference instead of just lying in bed. I mean, I was in bed for 3 months just waiting for the miracle to happen and my brain to start working again. I needed to feel engaged in that process. So I invented a game, and in the process of playing the game myself, with my friends and family, and there was no digital component at that time, but it was all about identifying quests that I could take in the next 24 hours, power-ups, things that would make me feel good or productive, even if I was having a terrible day, identifying the bad guys so that I could battle them, test my strengths against them, eventually vanquish them, recruit allies, give each ally something to do. My sister, her role as my ally was to call me at the end of every day, and just to give me something positive to look forward to and try to work hard so that I would have something to tell her about my progress. Played it myself, put it online. We've now had more than 150,000 people use this game, not just for traumatic brain injury, which we're doing a clinical trial on, but also for depression, anxiety, all kinds of chronic pain, lots of chronic conditions. And what we're seeing is that it's all about self-efficacy. How do you convince someone that they're stronger than they know, that they have more power than they thought they had, and how do you help them unlock that power? When you wake up in the morning, you have choices, you have allies, you have resources, but you have to find the resources before you can use them. You have to recruit the allies before they can help you. You have to identify the things that give you strength before you can draw on them. And so now it's an app. There's a web version too, and it just helps you basically investigate your life. The same way that Super Mario is running, across that platform, looking for the mushroom power-ups or looking for the bad guys. We help you kind of run through your life, identifying all of that so that you can develop that sense of urgent optimism and determination and that you're surrounded, by allies everywhere you go.
And your long-term vision for this is going to be the incorporation of this kind of technology into rehab across a range of different situations?
We see this as, first of all, being a kind of first line of attack for individuals who might not be able to afford something like therapy or might not be able to deal with side effects from certain pharmaceuticals.
Sure.
And so it's sort of a kind of a cheaper and more accessible intervention. We know that a majority of chronic conditions are undertreated because people are afraid of doctors. They don't want bad news. They can't afford to have ongoing treatment. So basically trying to figure out how to shift some of this taking care of ourselves back onto ourselves and to make it cheaper and fewer side effects. And the mobile platform seems to be really an easy way to get into their lives.
I want to perhaps wrap on hitting on in your book Reality is Broken. Can you just talk a second about the motivation for that book and some of the sort of the cornerstones of what you covered in the book?
I wanted to write Reality is Broken because there is so much anxiety about gaming in our culture right now, or we have this kind of schizophrenia about gaming. On one hand, we kind of idolize gaming because it's so addicting and so engaging, and isn't it amazing that we're spending 3 billion hours a week playing these games? All media should be like this. All engagement should be like this. But at the same time, we're terrified of games. We're terrified that they draw us out of reality, that they make us miss out on real life, that they're somehow warping our attention or teaching us bad habits. And so there's this kind of like disconnect where we love games so much that we're playing them 3 billion hours a week. Nobody's paying us to do it. We're not getting any status for it. Nobody's saying, good for you. This is a good, life choice. but we love it so much we do it anyway, even in the face of all of this sort of anxiety and sometimes ridicule. So I just wanted to see, is there something we can do about this kind of schizophrenia or disconnect? First of all, let's look at games and why we love them so much so we can figure out, are they playing a positive role in our real lives? And as I started to unpack why we love games and how much of it has to do with developing new skills and feeling like, we're productive and engaged and a part of something bigger than ourselves, all these things we get out of games are exactly the kinds of skills that we should be bringing to real life and motivations that would get us involved with the world's most difficult challenges. So I basically wrote the book, to say there's good news, and isn't it nice that we now have 1 billion gamers on the planet who've spent 10,000 hours by the time they turn 21 honing these gamer skills, because now we can put them in service of our greatest challenges.
So if you had to name the things that a game does right that causes a person to want to spend that much time, what are the attributes of a game that it does right to encourage people to want to spend more and more time?
A game, first and foremost, provokes curiosity. It says, here's a goal, here's an obstacle. Do you think you can achieve the goal? Do you think you can get around the obstacle? Every game starts there. And it provokes curiosity, which provokes engagement and creativity. When we're curious, when we don't know if it's possible, if we don't know what the right strategy or solution is, then we're more likely to explore different options and to feel the sort of creative confidence as we approach the problem. So I actually think the most important thing that a game designer can do is to identify an obstacle or a challenge that feels fresh and sparks that curiosity, whether it's, a time constraint or a resource constraint or just really provoke their curiosity. And then you have to provide feedback to let them know, are they on their way? Are they, how close are they? Are they on the right track?
So is that the second thing? It's actually enabling the player to know their progress towards the goal.
Right. I would say this is the third. The first thing is you have the goal.
Yeah.
The second thing is you have constraints on the goal that make it harder than it has any right to be.
It makes it meaningful and interesting in that regard.
Right, yeah. So there have to be rules or limitations on how you can achieve the goal, because those constraints provoke the creativity and the curiosity. Once you have the goal and the rules or constraints, then you want to be getting feedback on how you're doing, some way to observe if you're making progress. And then lastly, it just always has to be voluntary. You have to feel like this was your choice, and that's what's going to take all of these you're going to feel stressed out because games are hard and challenges are hard. You're going to feel frustration, but we need you to feel that frustration in a positive way as just sparking your ambition and sparking your motivation.
And that comes from it being voluntary.
Yes. So you have to invite people and you have to let them accept the challenge. It can never be mandatory. That's you can never mandate participation in a game.
So you've covered those four. Do you have an example you can offer up?
Well, I think it's so important to realize that gamification requires good game design, and good game design requires really an intuition about what will make it harder to accomplish a goal and yet somehow easier to go for that goal because now it's so hard. So I did a game that was trying to motivate dancing in socially introverted people, right? Mm-hmm. So the first dance quest was to dance without moving your feet, which is, it's harder to dance without moving your feet because the first thing you do when you start to dance is move your feet. We put this sort of absurd obstacle in the way of successfully dancing, and that suddenly freed up all of these introverted people to do it because they didn't have to try to do it in a way that would be sort of normal, or they didn't have any...
The correct way.
Yeah, they didn't do it in the correct way. So I just can't overstate how important it is to get that intuition around what will motivate interest and also freedom to be creative. And it's often a constraint. It's often getting a goal and putting restrictions on it that will it will feel absurd, and that absurdity is what makes it a game. I mean, if you're talking about a sophisticated game, there's usually a sense of progress and mastery, and it's ideally you want to have a way for total novices or total newbies to start and sort of claw their way up.
Because in the educational system we have today, you start at 100% and you work your way down.
Well, I mean, if we're talking about education, yeah, the first thing that will go will be grades, absolutely. I mean, everybody knows that who's looking at this space, and that will be self-motivated, choosing activities and choosing learning modules and ways to prove what you've learned, so that you are just adding and adding until you get the score that you want. And some people, some students will be happy with what is considered a B, get to 85 points, and some students will want 100, and that, because it will be their choice to just work and work and work until they get to where they want to be. It will all be driven by positive stress. Yeah. In fact, I typically prescribe personal bests as opposed to global competition. It is the most universally motivating kind of competition, is to try to beat a previous score or record and improve your performance.
Hey, Jane, thank you so much for your time today.
Oh,
An honor
my
and a pleasure, and good luck with the clinical trials. That's exciting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.